Hi, this is Rob Packard from Medical Device Academy. This week's live stream webinar is going to be talking just about how do you find a preventive action that's really just a preventive action. There are so many times that we go into companies and we look at their corrective actions or CAPA system. And one of the requirements of an ISO 1345 system is that they also have preventive actions. Unfortunately, most of the time when we ask, can I see your preventive actions? We get something that's a corrective action that has a part of it that they're saying, oh, this is preventive. And we ask a few other questions and it's not really a preventive action. In order to be a preventive action, it can't be something that's based upon a complaint or it's based on non-conforming material or it's based on an adverse event or some other type of similar thing that you would open up a corrective action for. The definition of a corrective action is you're preventing reoccurrence. So just the prevent part isn't enough. It's got to be preventing something that never happened before. If it happened before, by definition, it's not preventive, it's corrective. You're correcting the problem so it won't happen again. So it's a corrective action. You correct the initial occurrence, you prevent the future occurrences. That's the essence of a corrective action. But when we're looking for preventive actions, we're looking for evidence that the company's being proactive. Are you identifying problems before they occur? Oh, I don't know. Maybe before we ship out a product, maybe we should do some packaging validation and make sure we don't get packaging complaints about damaged product. That would be an example of a preventive action. That's also something that's required for design controls and something you should be doing for all your products before you commercialize them. We don't normally claim something like that as a preventive action, but it is. It is an example of a preventive action. Whereas if you wait until you get a complaint for a damaged package, now it's a corrective action. You might have actually done a packaging validation, but it just barely passed. So I have a great example. I have a company that did a packaging validation study. And when I say packaging validation, because we have a speaker that's coming on next week talking about this topic, Jan Gates. She's going to be talking about packaging validation, but there's packaging validation where you're validating the packaging process. There's packaging validation where you're doing shelf life and stability testing. And then there's packaging validation where you're making sure it will arrive to your customer intact. And the best way to separate those three is to call the first example, we're validating the packaging process. And I normally put that under our procedure 14 for process validation. In fact, there's an example of how to do packaging process validation in the GHGF guidance document, which we actually give people a copy of when they buy that procedure, in addition to our procedure. The second example, the making sure that the product will have the shelf life that you intend and won't run into stability problems or expire before your customer needs to use it. That is called shelf life testing. And then the third example, where we're talking about something where we're trying to make sure that the product, how do I describe it? Making sure that the project arrives on time at the customer and arrives intact without damage. That's transit testing. So we have three different types: process packaging validation, we have shelf life testing and stability testing, and we have transit testing, where we would also look at the impact of altitude, temperature, highs and lows, as well as things like vibration and drop testing. So this particular company that I was working with, they did the transit testing. And one of the things they observed when they did the visual examination of those products that were being packaged and shipped was that there was scuffing on the outside of the packaging. So it was only a cosmetic issue. The product wasn't damaged. It passed the transit testing requirements. So they could have just gone on and said, we're not doing anything more. But to prevent the potential for a customer complaining about the cosmetic damage or for the potential that one of these days somebody actually treats a package worse than the potentially worst case scenario validation of transit testing to prevent the potential outcome of somebody damaging that packaging that way. They decided, let's go a little bit further and protect our package even more. So what they did is they did a root cause investigation. If this were to be damaged further beyond cosmetic, what would cause it? And what the root cause was, there wasn't enough packaging material in there to isolate it from vibration back and forth. And so they just needed a little bit different packaging configuration to restrict that motion during the vibration testing. And a good example of that is I'm working with a company developing an electronic device, and they want to put it in a Tyvek pouch for sterilization, but it will move around a lot in the Tyvek pouch. So to prevent it from moving around and potentially breaking the sterile barrier and no longer being sterile, which would be bad, they're putting a card inside that Tyvek pouch, and the device nests in the card and is locked into place and can't move. And so by using that card, it restricts the movement, and the card goes edge to edge on the inside of the Tyvek pouch. So that's an example of a preventive action you can implement. You'd see the initial testing results, it passed the testing, but there was the potential for it to break through if you did enough times of it shipping back and forth from one location to another, or it was treated poorly. So to prevent that outlier that's outside the norm, what we're going to do is we're going to restrict the motion of the product to reduce the potential for damage of the packaging due to vibration. So that's just one example of a really good preventive action. If you get a complaint about a package being damaged, or you see product damage and you identify it as non-conforming, those are things that are corrective actions. So when an ISO auditor comes in and looks at your system, they're looking for, do you also have examples of pure preventive actions? A little bit of being a purist in this approach to auditing, but it's a requirement. It's a separate clause of the standard, and the FDA doesn't have that. FDA has 21 CFR 820.100, and it's called corrective and preventive action. It's one phrase. There is no gap. There is no two separate sections. And the way the FDA describes it, and this is during an actual FDA training that I took in conjunction with AAMI, and the instructor was Kim Troutman herself, who helped write the 1345 standard and 21 CFR 820. She said, what we look for is somebody moving from one line where the problem occurred and looking on other lines that use a similar process to see if the same problem could occur. So a good example of that is if you have a product that had short shots for some reason, and let's say it was because you weren't drying the resin properly in your molding process. So the resin you normally dry resin to make sure it doesn't shrink too much. And so they want a certain amount of moisture content or less. Well, if you saw a problem on one production line, you correct the problem, you sort and scrap. So that's one way to correct the problem. The corrective action might be to implement a log sheet to make sure the operators are always verifying the dryness of the resin before they start work. So maybe a checklist or something. That could be a simple corrective action and some training to go with that checklist to make sure they do it and they know how to use it and what the importance is and what the defects of their work are. Is see, this is a short shot because somebody didn't do this. But a preventive action, according to the FDA, would be going to other product lines and seeing if there are similar problems. And that really isn't what we're looking for when we're looking for pure examples of preventive action, because it's the same problem. You should automatically be saying, where else could this exact same problem could occur? All our other molding lines. So if you're implementing a proper preventive action and revising your procedures, you're not going to just revise it on one production line. You're going to revise it on all your production lines that use that process. And so it's really, yes, it meets the requirements of the FDA, and they're not going to be the stickler for it. But your notified body auditor or certification body for MDSAP should be saying, this isn't really a preventive action. And usually, if they're a reasonable auditor, the first time they'll say, well, you have examples of preventive action, but they're not really preventive actions. Next time, I really need to see something that's a true preventive action and not corrective in any nature. And if they come back the next time and you don't have that, then they should be issuing a minor nonconformity because they just mentioned it verbally as an observation last time. They were a nice person and took it easy on you. And that almost always backfires and the company doesn't do what they should. And so you might as well just give them the nonconformity right from the start. But if they still don't get it when you come back a third time, now we're going to escalate it to a major and it can even affect the validity of your certificate and we could suspend your certificate. All because you can't think of a preventive action. And companies are like, well, I can't think of any. There's so many companies that say this. And I was talking with Matthew Walker about this. We're always talking about CAPA because it's such a problem for so many of our clients. They struggle with the CAPA process. And he's like, it's so easy. All they have to do is sit down in a manager review meeting and say, does anybody have any ideas for what could go wrong that isn't right now? It's not going wrong right now. Is there anything you could think of that could happen in the near future that could be a problem for us? Whatever you think of, that's an opportunity for preventive action. It's just contingency planning. What if this went wrong? Well, let's do something about it now and come up with a preventive action so it doesn't happen. And not all of those what ifs that you come up with a solution for are worthy of a formal preventive action. But is it that hard to have a manager review once a quarter and come up with a single preventive action? Just one that's worthy of a preventive action plan. That's all you really need to do. We have somebody here that gave me a comment, and they said, "Sir, please explain the MDR." So I'm assuming we mean the medical device regulations for Europe, which is 2017-745. That has a requirement for CAPA. It doesn't have a specific requirement for corrective and preventive separately, but they do expect that you're going to have a CAPA system that has corrective and preventive action separate. The reason why is most of the notified bodies, if not all of them, are expecting you to comply with ISO 1345 as a recognized standard. And so we just recently had the amendment to 1345. Instead of it being 1345 2016, it's now EN ISO 1345 2016 A11 2021. So it's a 2021 amendment. I talked about that in another webinar, but you do have to have a CAPA system for your MDR compliance, but following the requirements of 1345 and clause 852 and 853 is all you need to do. You don't have to have more than that. I hope that answers the question about MDR. If you wanted a lot more information about MDR, I recommend visiting the website on our Contact Us page and ask a more detailed question what you're looking for. Because we actually have a whole webinar series, 8-part series on MDR compliance and implementing quality system for the MDR. But this particular live video, it's specific to CAPA, and there's no different requirement for Europe regulations versus ISO 1345 or MDSAP for that matter, or Canada or any other country, except FDA has this historical feature where they say corrective and preventive, and they lump them together instead of keeping them separate. So what works a lot in the US won't necessarily work for an MDSAP or ISO 1345 audit. So we find a lot of US companies struggle with this. But even my European clients, they sometimes get nonconformities because they don't have any examples of a pure preventive action. So here are some examples you might want to consider. If you have, let's say, 10 people around the table, and each person is a manager in a different department, and you're having a manager review, and each of those people is part of your top management. Each of those people has a process that they're responsible for. They have some things that could go wrong in the future for it. Let's take a simple, we've already hit on shipping. Let's pick on something different, like customer service. So your customer service is taking orders. Somebody asks, could you please ship this product? I want this product. Well, what if that product is not authorized to ship to that country? What if somebody accidentally ships it to a country that they're not authorized to ship it to? That would be an example of a nonconformity. Um, you could prevent that from happening. If you have a new product coming on board and you implement some additional retraining on people, hey, we have this new product. Here's the countries where it is currently has regulatory clearance. Here's the countries where it doesn't. So if you get an order from one of our existing customers wanting that new product, you have to verify on this form which of these countries they can ship to. You might have a solution like, we really need this built into our Salesforce.com system, so it doesn't allow them to order it or place the order and fulfill and confirm the order for those customers if they're in those countries. So maybe a little pop-up window that makes them, pick which one of these countries it is, because these are the only ones. And somebody's job is to go in and update that drop-down menu as we get new regulatory approvals. That would be an example of a way of automating the solution and preventing somebody in Salesforce from just picking a new product. Oh, no, for this product, you get a pop-up window and you can only pick for certain countries. And if they're not on the list, you can't place the order. So that would prevent it. Simple preventive action, very easy to validate, won't have a long time to do any effectiveness check because you just verify that the validation worked. You don't actually have to have any orders placed at all. Just verify that your software validation was completed on the change and you're done. That's your effectiveness check. Here's my software validation report. I had acceptance criteria in the validation report. That's my acceptance criteria. I don't have to wait till people do 3 orders. That 3 orders stuff, has to happen 3 times correctly. 3 is an arbitrary magical number that doesn't have any meaning at all. People think, I got to have 3 points so I can have a trend. Well, that tripled the number of nonconformities you have if you wait till you have a trend. In this particular case, you have a software validation of the change you made to Salesforce.com in the configuration change, and you validate that change, and you have acceptance criteria in that validation. And it's a quality system software validation, which is another thing a lot of companies don't do. So if your Salesforce system is used to order things and you haven't done validation of Salesforce, there's something that should be a nonconformity. So you should be doing that. And here's an example of an element of that would be really important, making sure people can't place orders for countries where they shouldn't ship it. That's just one example. But each person on your team in that management review meeting should be able to think of at least one thing that could go wrong in the near future with anticipated changes or things that are changing in the world. And they could say, this could happen. We could have a bunch of people get sick and we can't deliver on time. We could have untrained people working on something because we just brought in some temps. There's all kinds of things that could go wrong. Let's think about which ones of these might be worthy of a preventive action and prevent some problems before they occur. That's all preventive action is all about. But the best quality systems out there will have examples of preventive actions separate from their corrective actions. And in fact, the best ones will actually have more preventive actions than corrective. And how many times have I seen that in my entire career? Once. I've seen one company that had more preventive actions than corrective. I've seen quite a few that had a very good mix where they had maybe a third of their CAPA system was preventive, but only one that had more preventive than corrective. So that means they're being more proactive than they are reactive, which is awesome. That's what you want. There's one more source. So Matthew gave a great simple suggestion. Just brainstorm around the table. Each person give me an idea for something that could go wrong in the future in your department that might be worthy of a preventive action. And then we'll all pick the one that we like best and we'll implement that as a preventive, or maybe we'll pick more than one if they're really good. Then the other area, and this is the area I always recommend to auditors, metrics. The whole point of measuring something is so you can see the trend. You can see it's getting worse, going up towards an upper limit, or going down towards a lower limit. So if you have monitoring and measuring of a process, if you pick the right metric and you establish the appropriate upper or lower or upper and lower limits, then as you see a trend, you can take action. I'll pick a simple example of a manufacturing line. You're making some sort of part on a CNC machine, and you have run out as the tool wears. So the operator has to make adjustments. If the operator is taking their samples on a regular cycle as they're supposed to and indicating it on a run chart, they can see the trend. They can see as they're getting close to a limit. And usually, if you have a really good operation, they'll actually say at that limit, when you hit this point, which is our control limit, make this change. So it might be an adjustment and offset. If you hit this limit, or you've made multiple offset adjustments already and you've maximized your offset, now it's time for a tool change. And so these are preventive actions that they put in place in a tool, a CNC line, to make sure that they don't overshoot their spec limit and have to sort parts for finding the ones that are out of spec and toss them because they can't fix it anymore. You can't put it back in the chuck and run it through the CNC machine as an individual part. They're all run off a rod stock, and you can't do that. You have to catch it before it gets there and change the tool. And changing tools in a CNC machine is pretty normal operation. A lot of companies rely on an experienced person that knows better, but having a run chart and having instructions of the control limit and having training on what to do when it gets to that limit so they never get to the specification limit, that's implementing statistical process control. That's implementing a run chart, which is a tool for statistical process control, or SPC, and teaching them, you can make offset adjustments. You should make them this often. After you've made this many adjustments, you can't make any more and you'll have to do a tool change. And here's how frequently you're probably going to have to check your parts. And if you're a really experienced journeyman CNC operator is actually going to know additional things like how it sounds is going to be a clue to them. And like, this isn't running smoothly. I have a problem before they've even measured the parts. Now, you're not going to get that from a younger, less experienced CNC operator. So you need to give them these tools until they get to that level of experience where they can just hear the machine doesn't sound right and they can make a quick adjustment on the fly. Not everybody's that good or that experienced, and you need to take the variability out of it, take the inexperience out of the equation, and implement some tools that'll make them more consistent. So that's a simple example of a preventive action you can implement in your manufacturing area if you have CNC operations. But just the implementation of a run chart and instructions on where the limits are and what to do when you hit them is the preventive action. And it goes along with training. So whenever you have a corrective action or preventive action, one of the things that the FDA has in there that I think is really important that doesn't really get emphasized in ISO 1345 is we want to see evidence that you've updated your procedure to reflect the corrective actions or preventive actions. So where did you update your operator at work instructions for that CNC operation to do that? Where is that found? They have in-process inspection. Where do you update your in-process inspection instructions to do this? So that would be one of the things that they expect you to do. And they also expect you to do training. And so I think that sort of captures that example pretty well for most people. Let me see if I can come up with another example off the top of my head here. Okay. Here's an example of preventive action. You just started up a manufacturing operation in a controlled environment, clean room, and we have gowning procedures and we have cleaning procedures. One of the things that you can do is to alternate cleaning solutions. It's a best practice. Normally, when you first start up the room, you use one cleaning solution, but they recommend that you rotate because if you don't rotate, some of the microbiology flora that develop in the room naturally can become resistant to your cleaning solutions because you've been constantly exposing them to the same cleaning solution. So if periodically you rotate the cleaning solution, the ones that were resistant to the old solution were not likely to be resistant to the new solution if it's a different type. And so that's a great preventive action to prevent the bioburden from continuing to climb because organisms are resistant to that cleaning solution. Most companies have this happen when they see a bioburden spike and they do an investigation. They try to figure out how to get it back under control. But if you're starting a new clean room and you have an experienced microbiologist that comes in and explains best practices on gowning, degowning, cleaning your clean room, sampling, and maintenance of the facility, that's ideal. So if that's something that you have never heard of before, you probably are not monitoring and measuring your clean room quite the way you should be, and you might have some problems that you don't even know about. But if you're setting up one for the first time, these are preventive actions. If you wait until it's a problem, now it's a corrective action. And you really want some evidence that you've monitored your clean room. So if I see the trend is going up, 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 I should be asking why is that going up, and this might be one of the things contributing. It could just be we're running more product and we're making more money, so we have more bioburden, we have more people in the room. Those are things that contribute as well. So maybe we have to increase our filtration capacity. Maybe we need to change out our filters more often. Maybe we need to look at what kind of filters are on the machines that have exhaust fans. Maybe we need to change our tacky mats more often. Maybe we need to do a better job of cleaning. Maybe we need to change our degowning procedure so we take the hairnets off after we get out of the room rather than in the degowning room and gowning room where we have hair fibers go all over that gowning room. Better to take that hairnet off after you get out the door and have the garbage can outside the door of the gowning room. So just little things that you learn over time, getting advice from experts over time. This is how we solved it. Ask around, network, think of what things that could go wrong. But if you're monitoring and measuring your process, you're doing brainstorming, your contingency plans and what ifs during your manager reviews, and you're looking at best practices from your industry colleagues for other operations, you may come up with a lot of really good examples of preventive action for your facility. And usually most auditors are pretty reasonable. They say, show me one example of a pure preventive action I can put in my report and I'll let you go. And you really should have a sort of a quality objective, maybe, of we're going to have one a quarter during each of our manager reviews. Something like that would be a great thing to see. But not everybody does that. So if your company doesn't have any preventive actions, you're in that boat. That's something you should be looking at. The last thing I wanted to share with you today is we're introducing our new topic of the month. Guess what it is? It's CAPA. We were going to introduce it in October. We decided to push it off to November. We were a little bit behind in implementing the cybersecurity information for everybody, so we extended that another month. Now we're starting CAPA. So CAPA will be the topic of the month for November, and this is the first live webinar on that topic. And I actually changed our procedure of the month that you can get a 50% discount on. This month it's going to be CAPA. So the CAPA procedure, SYS 024, that's the procedure of the month. So if your company needs a better CAPA procedure, that might be a great place to look, and you can get half off on that procedure if you use the code Alicia. But that is on our standards, our procedures page, which is SOPs for the menu item at the top of the page. So please take a look at that page, see if it's a procedure you think that might be helpful. We also have some more advanced webinars on risk-based CAPAs, and we'll be talking more about CAPAs later on this month, including next week's live YouTube streaming session on CAPA as well. Thank you. See you next week.